In the study of Savitri, there are actually three aspects. The first aspect is, of course, the thematic contents of Savitri. The subject matter, the development, the substance, and what we would call as the text of Savitri. The second aspect is, of course, the inspiration of Savitri. The inspiration of Savitri is in the phraseology of Sri Aurobindo, the overhead inspiration. It comes from the overhead planes. Above the mind, there are four spiritual planes in ascending order: the higher mind, the illumined mind, intuition, and overmind. Overmind is the highest possible expression that can be attained in our present day language. There are a very few examples here and there in the English poetry in which we do see the rush of overmind inspiration. But that's a very rare thing. In fact, it's not even a rush. It as if comes through accidentally. It sort of manages to slip through the effort of the poet. But in Savitri, this has now become a kind of an established feature, a goal that was to be achieved and that has been achieved. What Sri Aurobindo called the mantra, that is the expression towards the future poetry is striving. It is that mantra which comes from the overhead mind, from the overmind plane. And in Savitri, there are number of passages which belong purely to this overmind plane. But in all those roughly 24,000 lines, there is definitely the spiritual atmosphere. There is definitely the overhead inspiration belonging to any one of these categories: higher mind, illumined mind, intuition, overmind. That is the aspect of inspiration. The third aspect is the art of Savitri. Savitri as a poetic expression has to follow certain rules of poetry. The rules can be, of course, adapted, modified, controlled, made plastic, made moldable, made pliable. But still, the general basis of the art has remained constant throughout. Savitri is essentially a poem which is pentametric blank verse in its form. There are 5 feet in every line, and the lines are 99.9% end stop lines. There are a few lines which overflow. There are few places where the lines do overflow, but they are rare. Now, in addition to that, the pentametric structure is not throughout one fixed structure. It is not throughout the iambic pentametric style, pentametric feature. Z zim, z zim, z zim, z zim, z zim. If it keeps on repeating line after line, 24,000 lines, it will become absolutely ridiculous. It will become very monotonous. It will spoil even the contents of the poetry itself. There have to be variations in this formulation. It can be z, zim, zim, z, zim, z, zim, z, zim, z. It can keep on changing, or what you would call essentially you have iambs, trochees, pyrrhics, spondees. There can be at times dactyls and anapes. They are quite frequent, anapes. There can be also amphipracs or critics. Generally, these are the few types of feet which we see in Savitri. Now, the distribution of this feet also has now something to do with the flow of sound. When the sound flows, it carries sometimes undercurrents. Sometimes it carries something which is beyond it. High-pitched sounds enter in, low-pitched sounds enter in. There are what one would call the undertones and overtones. In the musical language, if you have got a fundamental frequency, then the higher multiples of the fundamental are the harmonics, and they belong to what one would call the overtones. Similarly, the inverse of that, the divisions of the fundamental will constitute the undertones. They are low in pitch, soft, very mildly suggestive of certain things, don't emphasize, whereas overtones kind of insist upon their being heard, and it is that variation which is what we have to see in Savitri also. We'll take some examples. Let us take first example from Book 4, Canto 3. Under that moon gold forehead's dreaming breadth were seas of love and thought that held the world. 98.34. These lines appear in the canto named The Quest, The Call and the Quest. Canto 3 of Book 4, you see. In these two lines, under that moon gold forehead's dreaming breadth were seas of love and thought that held the world. In these three lines, there is a certain sound effect produced by the repetition of D. The alliteration of D produces certain kind of a sound effect occurring 5 times in the first line and finally in hell and world the second line. It somehow seems to enrich the meaning of the line. This repetition of D seems to enrich, add to the sound value, to the meaning content also of this line. Such hearing experience could be taken as undertone or overtone, with the inner ear awakening to the elusive vowels as U and O. Now we can scan this line under trochee, that moon am gold forehead, again I am head dream, I am in breadth. Under that moon gold forehead dreaming breadth. In verse we have trocheic beginning followed by 4 iambs. Actually, we have got here two compounds. Well, no, two words, one compound and one word. Moon gold. Moon gold, if you really want to accent it properly, it will be a trochee. Moon gold. Gold does not get that stress. And then we have got forehead as a trochee again. So, in the metrical scheme, what happens here is under trochee, that moon and gold 4 and hence dream and ink breath again and I am. The third and fourth feet could be spondees if you stress on gold and forehead, because they do contain quantity. These two words, gold and head in forehead, contain quantity of sound. So if you kind of stress on that on the quantity basis, this could be spondees. But in pure accentual meter, we simply have moon gold, forehead, dreaming, breath, as iambic. It is true that metrically there is nothing unusual in these two lines, but one finds the sense plus sound combination of these two lines, sense and sound combination, very magical, very charming, very entrancing. This sound repetition is certainly prominent, but it does not bring in any undertone or overtone. Perhaps it cannot. The complexity of image is borne by the bright density of consonantal sound, which rather would have the tendency of taking away those tones. The full sentence is 98.34. Amid her tresses cloudy multitude, the long eyes shadowed as by wings of night, under that moon goes forest dreaming web, were seals of love and thought that held the world, marveling at life and earth they saw to spark. Marveling, that is the dactyl, at life I am, and earth, again I am. They saw, again I am, truth spark, spondy. So the last line is dactyl, I am, spondy. The D of the third line, under that moon gold forest dreaming breath, gets extra prominence because of the presence in the first two lines also. Let us take another example from a metrical point of view. The example of atom smashing, which was written long before the atom was actually smashed. Chevreul wrote this line much before the atom as a weapon was used in World War II. The line is, the raven invisible atoms omnipotent force, 68.85. The raven invisible atoms omnipotent force. This line is the most unusual description of all that is happening in the occult world. Metrically also, it is the most unusual line. It can be scanned as the raven invisible atoms omnipotent force. I am plus followed by 4 anapes. We have here one I am followed by 4 anapes, an extremely rare example in poetry. The line, the raven invisible atoms omnipotent force. The power is so much packed in the line as if it keeps on opening all the while with all this impetuosity rushing out in a ceaseless flow. The overtones bear all the charge of the force. The overtones in this line bear all the charge of that force that is present in the fission atoms explosion. So this line itself is a kind of an explosion line. The raven, invisible atoms, omnipotent force. Something has kind of smashed, broken out from the invisible. in the description surrounding it, that sheer attribute of universality is in comparison quite on a low key. This is the high mark of possibility of the highest inspiration. This line has powerful overtones, at least a dozen harmonics climbing along with it. Dozen harmonics, the raven, invisible atoms, omnipotent force. If the base fundamental is 64, then the first harmonic is 128, second is 256, third is 112, and it goes on like that. You see. This line has powerful overtones, at least a dozen harmonics climbing along with it. That is also the quality of the mantra, which is always a chant of emphatic assertion. Here is the full passage. Alone, a process of events was there, and nature's plastic and protein chain, and strong by death to slay or to create the riven invisible atoms, omnipotent force. The third line, and strong by death to slay or to create. The third line has as much in it that it gives extraordinary power to the riven atom. It would be wrong to compare this line with Shelley's stanza in his Adonais. But let us do it for a moment. The leprous corpse, touched by the spirit splendor, exhales itself in flowers of gentle breath, like incarnations of the stars. When splendor is charged in fragrance, they illumine breath and mock the merry worm that waves beneath, not we know, dies. Sound that alone, which knows we as a word consumed before them, by slightest writing, the intense atom glows a moment, then is quenched in a most cold repose. The intense atom, that is what gets related to the riven invisible atoms, omnipotent. The intense atom glows a moment, then is quenched in a most cold repose. The intensity of this atom glowing for a moment is only the intensity of the powerful lyrical, and therefore it gets quenched in a lifeless cold repose. Contrast this with what Oppenheimer described as a brighter than 1,000 suns when the riven atom's omnipotent force burst in New Mexico in the Trinity test conducted on 16 July 1945. Local time 5:29:45 a.m. with an yield of 20 kilotons. But recognize that this omnipotent force appeared much earlier than the Trinity in Arizona. The latest date of it, I'm repeating. Local time 5 hours 29 minutes 45 seconds a.m. in the morning with an yield of 20 kilotons. But recognize that this omnipotent force line appeared much earlier than the Trinity event in the Arizona. The latest date of its occurrence in the Savitri drought in Shivandu's own hand is 6 September 1942, and it could be even a little earlier than that. He wrote again later in 1946. The latest date of occurrence in the Savitri drafts in Shivandu's own hand is 6 September 1942, and it could be even a little earlier than that. He wrote again later in 1946 about the atom's tremendous cosmic energy leaping to slay the enemy, strong by death to slay. The use of atomic weapon in August 1945 demonstrated that full early potential of the riven atom. But she happened to also notate around 1940 the responsibility that rests on man to save mankind from such an omnipotent force. Here is the sonnet Sri wrote long before the smashing power of the atom was realized by the physicists. The sonnet is entitled A Dream of Surreal Science. One dreamed and saw a gland right ambit, drink at a mermaid, capture immortality. A committee of hormones on the Aegean brink compose the Iliad and the Odyssey. A thyroid mating almost nude under the bow tree saw the eternal light, and rising from its mighty solitude spoke of the wheel and eightfold path. All right. A brain of a disordered stomach driven, thundered to Europe, conquered, ruled and fell, from St. Helena went, perhaps to heaven. Thus whacked on the thus whacked on the surreal world until a scientist played with atoms and blew out the universe before God had time to shout. This was written on 25th September 1939. Before God had time to shout, a scientist played with atoms and blew out the universe before God had time to shout.